Hi, everybody. I'm here with Natalie Collins. Natalie is the CEO of the Women's Liberation Collective. She's the author of this excellent book, Out of Control. And also, she's a co author of this book, The Leadership Trap, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Natalie, it's brilliant to have you with us. Thank you very much for being here. Can you?
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Can you tell us just a little bit more about who you are and what it is that you do?
I've been great. I was born into the church, like I mean, not literally, I was born in a hospital, but like into a Christian family. So have been raised within kind of Christian culture, and have spent the last 15, 16 years working around men's violence towards women. And a significant proportion of that is involved thinking about how Christians can stop being terrible at responding to abuse, primarily domestic abuse, but also more generally. And in relation to the growth book and this conversation, about just over a year ago, the news that Mike Pilavacci had to step back for safeguarding reasons at Sole Survivor. I've blogged and tweeted as God Loves Women for many years, actually. But when that situation landed and it felt like a complete silence descended on Christian culture, particularly
Yeah.
on those in a leadership role.
Yeah.
It kind of happened just before Easter, so Spring Harvest, the leadership conference, all these events that happen around that time of year. There was a complete just abdication of any sort of responsibility around that. So I started writing, I started critiquing the statements through my God Loves Women blog. And then through that, ended up setting up a separate Twitter account called Needs Light, which kind of details what's going on in the situation, has a timeline on the God Loves Women blog that looks at what's happening and all that kind of stuff. And really, I suppose I'm a bit of an agitator. I guess you could talk about me being kind of called to offer that kind of old school prophetic. Thankfully, God doesn't ask me to turn on my side and lie naked on the mud or anything, because he can, thankfully I get to keep my clothes on. But actually to really challenge the church, which isn't always easy, but I'm very blessed to have the opportunity to challenge and to speak and to do the stuff that I do.
Brilliant. Natalie, you do a terrific job, and particularly Needs Light, I know, has been an incredibly helpful Twitter account to a lot of people, including me. So thank you. This book, which you are one of the four authors for, The Leadership Trap, it was originally prompted by the many news stories of abusive leadership in churches and youth organizations, and particularly was prompted by Mike Pilavacci and Soul Survivor. Now, you wrote the last chapter, which was really about turning the narrative around and saying how we as leaders can avoid becoming toxic or abusive leaders ourselves. It was a really challenging chapter, I'm sure, to write and certainly to read. So my question really is, why did you decide to get involved with this project? Why did you write that chapter? Why did you decide to get involved?
Yeah, I think there's been a real challenge because there's been this real dearth of moral leadership, which is one of the things that's been so traumatic for those who are dealing with the fallout of this. Because there's the primary victims, or the people who've been the primary people who were harmed directly by Mike Pilavacci and by the culture at Soul Survivor, and then you've got the secondary group of people who were kind of involved in that culture but weren't directly harmed by Mike himself, and then you've got this kind of tertiary group, which are the people who went to Soul Survivor who've benefited from Mike Pilavacci's ministry, who are trying to make sense of whether their experiences of God in those spaces were real. What are they able to trust the leaders they know? Are they able to trust themselves? All of these kind of really big, massive questions.
Hmm.
And initially, and even I would say to this day, those who are paid and who are established in leadership roles are very often still abdicating their responsibility to offer that leadership, which would be less problematic if those people hadn't cultivated a culture that relies on them to lead them. So
Yeah.
we have this kind of a culture which has kind of developed around building uncritical consumers of of Christianity, which means that people have not really been equipped or resourced to do that kind of work themselves. And so
Yeah.
it's particularly morally repugnant, in my view, that those people who have created a reliance on their leadership and a reliance on
Yeah.
their books and on their events to now go, we've not got anything to say about this. And
Yeah.
so for me, it has been incredibly challenging to have to essentially be the person who's essentially going, what do we think about this? And what do we, and offering some of that really in a
Yeah.
space where there's been this massive vacuum.
Yeah.
And so have been really keen to support and cheer on any efforts that are really seeking to offer some leadership and to offer some
Yeah.
guidance. And this project is definitely part of that, particularly for youth leaders, where Soul Survivor holds this particular power and status. It is not young people now who are most affected by Soul Survivor. It's people in their 30s and 40s who were young people
Yeah.
20 years ago, isn't it? Who are most affected, and they're often youth leaders, and they're also trying to negotiate and navigate how to be leaders and how to support the young people. And so this project felt really meaningful for enabling all of us to be reckoning and wrestling with some of this stuff. So I was really glad to be able to contribute.
No, that's really helpful. And you think you've hit the nail on the head there. This isn't just a big national leader issue. It's an issue that trickles right down to the local church and local church pastors, local church youth leaders. And many youth leaders have had issues with their own leaders behaving in very similar manners. And then, as your chapter speaks to, running the risk of becoming like that themselves. In fact, what we're going to do now is we're going to hear a quote taken from your chapter, and then we're going to respond to it. That's okay.
No one wakes up one morning and decides to be an abuser. It is a gradual process as someone discovers abusive behavior benefits them. It may be that their natural gifts and skills allow them to bypass standard processes, and they are keen on saving themselves time and boring admin. Maybe their version of events, only slightly altered from the truth, is believed over someone else's actually true version, and so they increasingly learn that twisting the truth serves them. Perhaps they have been doing something they know is wrong, using pornography, cheating on their spouse, misusing finances, and emotionally manipulating those they should have been accountable to, keeping them from being found out. The applause from the congregation and the ways people talk about their gifting and skills convince them that they are always in the right. No one starts off being an abuser, but the benefits of abusive behavior certainly draw some down the path of abusiveness.
That is really challenging. Could you expand a little on what we've just heard from that quote, particularly two things, particularly how common do you think it is that leaders do grow into this sort of toxic abusive pathway? And how important is it that we identify early signs of becoming an abusive leader?
Yeah, so theologically, we would understand that sin is a choice people make. And so it should not be a surprise that abusive leaders are made, not born. Yeah, nobody is born an abusive leader. Nobody starts off in their leadership journey being abusive. That is our kind of base understanding of what it means to be a human being, is that we are making choices along the way, and particularly moving into things that are sinful and are harmful to other people. Those things are often about choices that are being made. So shouldn't be new information to people, but I think because abuse becomes exceptionalized, and because being an abuser is seen as such a bad thing, there is this kind of sense that we have this kind of othering quality to, abusing these people that are not like me, they're over here. And so we don't necessarily ask many questions about, well, how did they become an abuser? Or if we do, we start to do what the philosopher Kate Mann calls himpathy, which is the undeserved empathy we give to men who do terrible things. So we start to try to justify. If we try to ask why they do what they do, we assume that they must be some sort of tortured, broken soul who is, the hurt people mantra. And so we either other them as monsters, or we try to make their behavior understandable by essentially affording them levels of empathy that we often then don't afford to the people they hurt. And so actually understanding that abusive behavior is instrumental.
Yeah.
It is doing something to achieve a particular purpose. And very often, the vast majority of abusers really start off using abusive behavior to avoid responsibility or to gain something. So, for instance, there was an interview with a self-confessed gaslighter on the BBC years ago. And he was asked, like, when did you start gaslighting your partners? And he said, well, one day my partner accused me of cheating on her, and I was cheating on her. But when she said to me, you know, I think you're cheating on me, the first thing that came into my head to say was, no, I'm not. How dare you accuse me? You're paranoid. And then he said, and to my surprise, she said, oh, is it me? Am I paranoid? Oh, I'm sorry. And he was like, oh, that worked. And so from that moment on, he then started to use gaslighting to avoid getting caught for the things he was doing wrong. And so often that's where abusive behavior starts. It starts at a moment where we're going to be held responsible for something we've done wrong, held accountable, or the things that, or when we start to choose to do things that if we were found out would cause us problems. And so then we start to manipulate the people around us to avoid being found out for the things that we're doing wrong. So it's about protecting ourselves from consequences, really.
Thank you. I want to ask you a question that I haven't prepped you for. That just prompted to, and so I've not really thought this through yet. So you have to bear with me. And if this just goes into all kinds of chaos, I'll cut it out and no one will ever know. But it does feel that whole hurt people thing is a huge part of our narrative in Christian circles. And if you are a youth worker or someone under who you think is an abusive leader, I feel like there's a strong sense of that person who's in the abused person, the victim, feels like they're supposed to look for a reason to forgive the person, but they're supposed to look for a reason that it's probably because they're like this and they're like this. I need to cut them some slack. And my question really is, to what extent should they do that? And to what extent should they say, no, I'm a victim, I'm hurt, I need to focus on myself in this position before I'm able to give the quote unquote grace or mercy or whatever religious word we stick on it to help them figure out why that person might be that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so from the beginning, if somebody is harming us or hurting us, our first step must be to look at what the consequences are on us and what we need in our lives to enable us to no longer be hurt and harmed by that other person.
Yep. Yes.
Because actually the best way to help the person who is harming us is to create a context in which they can stop harming us, because that is the best thing for them and it's the best thing for us. And so the best way we can offer care and compassion to somebody who is behaving abusively is to ensure that they are held accountable and they are stopped from being able to do that, because it is not actually helpful to them and it's not helpful to us and it's not helpful to all the other people that they are also perpetrating that behavior towards.
Yep.
And I think I'm currently reading a book called The Other Side of Sin, which is a theological edited volume about the challenge that so much of our theology is for the sinner, not the sinned against. And that actually we've moved from, like, the reason why sin is so reprehensible and the reason God hates sin is because of the harm it causes people. And so like the whole problem with sin is that harm that it creates. And actually what we end up doing is talking about sin as affecting the vertical relationship between us and God, and we neglect the horizontal way that sin affects our relationships with other people. And so there's something really significant about the ways that forgiveness operates within that space. And so we feel very much like we need to forgive the sinner. But what forgiveness does is the narrative of forgiveness does is it says that it basically gives the bystander a pass on having to do anything or change anything. So the bystander, so the person who learns about this harm gets to go, well, you need to forgive, which abdicates them from any responsibility to remedy anything in the situation.
Yep.
It allows the person who has been harmed to feel more control than they probably have, because it's like, if I have a ability to do something in this situation, I forgive. That allows me to feel some level of power and control that this abusive person is not giving me. And so it can counterintuitively, forgiveness can feel like a really good answer for the harmed person, because suddenly they go from a position of powerlessness to feeling like, well, I have the power to forgive, therefore, and the perpetrator is very keen on this, because what the main beneficiary of this narrative of forgiveness is the perpetrator, who is not required to do anything, because our theology and our culture is more interested in the sinner than the sinned against. And so until some of that changes, and so that thing about the and also there's something about why we want to explain why the perpetrator does these things is because they're broken, because they're sad, because whatever. That what that then allows us to do is again feel we have some control. So what abuse does is it takes away our power, it takes away our autonomy, it takes our ability to feel confident in our decision making, it strips us of all of the things that make us human, and having a sense of power or personal autonomy is a core part of what it means to be human. And so to be able to explain away the harm that is being caused us by, well, this person is broken and this person is damaged, and look at these sad things that have happened to this person, or that under, you know, or they're, I don't know, them being on the autistic spectrum, or whatever it is that we've decided is the reason why they are like they are. What that means that we can do is we feel some control and power, because we are able to explain it, even though what those explanations do and what that forgiveness does is it essentially leaves us in the same as powerless position. It doesn't really change our location to the power. It just allows us to make meaning and create a perception or that we are more powerful than we really are. And so it's only as we understand why we're motivated towards that, within a context where we are theologically rewarded and kind of prompt to take that approach, and that be the right approach, unlike being, you know, disgruntled and unforgiving and all these things that we get coded as, which the whole culture is rewarding us for doing things that are fundamentally colluding with perpetration. And if there's something that God hates, it's sin. And that means that we have to be really, really clear that wherever we are, wherever possible, we need to be seeking a situation where this person is not unable to continue doing that.
I think that's really helpful. Thanks for taking the time on that. I know it's a question I've had, and I'm sure it's a question that others have had as well, which is at what point am I meant to be focused on them? What point am I meant to be focused on me? And I'm thinking a lot of my background, you know, growing up and going to Bible college was in things like total depravity and this idea of Thomas A. Kempis said, you know, you need to consider that you're more likely to sin than anybody else, and that's how you get through life. And this idea that it's probably me. I'm probably, even if they're doing things that hurt me, I'm probably guilty at some level. And I think that's really unhealthy. And I think just separating, okay, what am I feeling from what am I doing? What are they doing, or what are they causing me, is really useful. So thank you. I'm Rose. Sorry, go for it.
And no, I was going to say that within the chapter, I talk a little bit about doing a power inventory, or inventory. I always get that word, pronounce it wrong, but a power inventory, because I think that's really crucial when we get to this conversation. Yes, we all do sin, but actually our location to power is really significant in the implications or consequences of that. So if somebody holds power over us, then their choice to behave in ways that are harmful to us, we're in a different location than when we are the person with the power. And so one of the challenges with a lot of those messages around us all being sinners and us all being wrong, it doesn't allow us to take an inventory of who holds the power here, who holds the status, who holds the who is the person who can change things, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And so we need to be encouraged to do an inventory, because we're never just in one power location, right? So if we're a youth leader, we will have somebody who's generally in management above us, who we are in down power to, but we will be in up power to the young people that we work with, both because of the age of our age, because of our status as a paid worker, potentially. The volunteers we work with will have it'd be in a different power location to the young people and to us, that we will be in a power location to them, but they will be in a power location to the young people. And if those volunteers are in a family relationship with the person who is in management to us, you know, like it gets more and more and more complicated. And so I think that sense, you know, if we are male, if we are female, if we are black, if we are white, the all of these, the intersections of our like status in different spaces, all of these things are going to be relevant when we're asking questions about sin and sinfulness. And the problem is that that we currently are power blind in our analyses of all of these things, and anything around leadership has to start from a fundamental location of asking, where is the power, what is the power, and how does that affect all of the things that I'm thinking about right now?
That's really helpful. And it sounds like what you're advocating for is really in two directions. You're advocating for a system of transparency and accountability with others, but also a real, you know, an inward direction, a real honesty with ourselves, to be vigilant, to be self-aware. And I guess what I'm asking is whether you have a story, whether you have an experience of that sort of balance of accountability and transparency and honesty from your own work that you could share with us.
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of things that I guess would like to offer or reflect on around stories. So I think the first thing I suppose is my own journey around this, and around, you know, like I spend a lot of my time telling people they're wrong and particularly telling people they're wrong in no uncertain terms. And so I've had to do a lot of real reflecting about, like, how do I remain accountable to being, like, what does it mean to be humble when you're called to, like, tell people they're wrong quite a lot, and like how does all of that operate, and what does that mean? And I think you know, the verse that has been really, really, really important for me is Jeremiah 17:8. You know, we are like a tree planted by a river. It's one of the Psalms as well. And the roots need to go so far down into that river that whether it's drought or whatever's going on, we are still like bearing fruit in every season. And for me, that has come about as that, you know, my understanding of that is that my identity has to be rooted in God so deeply that the core of me is not touched whether somebody is complimenting me or being horrible about me. That actually I'm grateful for positive feedback, and I'm reflective about negative feedback, but neither of those things is making me feel like I'm a terrible person or I'm an amazing person, because my identity isn't rooted in what people think of me.
Yeah.
And so, like, an example of this was years ago, I'd been mentioned really positively by a theologian in a blog they'd written, and somebody phoned me who was a kind of friend at the time, and they said, "Oh, did you know that you've been mentioned in this blog about women's leadership?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, it made me cry." And he was like, "What? It made me laugh." And I was like, "Why?" And he was like, "Because you're just a nobody, aren't you? Like this sort of and this." And I like,
Thanks.
I hung up very quickly, and I just was like, I went immediately from I'm nobody to maybe I'm nobody, and like it took me on this really incredible journey. My husband was just like, well, he's just and he said an expletive. You just don't need to listen to him. And I was like, it really affected me. It really touched me deeply. This
Yeah.
conversation, and it's actually like I have a lot to be thankful to this guy for, because it really got me to reflect on why am I feeling so deeply affected by being told by somebody that they think I'm a nobody.
Yeah.
And had to do so much work around ensuring that I build spiritual disciplines and practices into my life that mean that my roots are so deeply rooted in God that I'm not dependent on kind of people's praise and affirmation, but equally I'm not kind of affected deeply, you know, it's not affecting the core of who I am when people are negative about me. And so I think, from like personally, I think that's something I'd reflect on, that what are we doing to build a relationship with God that allows us to not be affected, because actually it's as we start to move, as our identity starts to be rooted in other places, that we start to make compromises. And you know, if in the sole survivor situation, in a lot of these situations where leaders are making terrible and harmful choices and hurting people, if everybody was rooted deeply enough in God, they wouldn't be fearful about the need to hold the person who is the golden goose to account, because their dependence would be on Jesus, not on Mike Pilavachi to get up and tell a funny story, right? And so I think, so I would say that that's kind of like from a personal reflection about what it means to you know, that it's so much of this is done in the quiet places, in the individual. What are we doing in our own personal life? If we're really, really honest, how much are we invested in what God thinks of us, and how many times are we going to make little compromises because it's what someone else thinks of us that matters more, or because we want this prize or this thing or this status or this success, which comes from somewhere other than God's, you know, like, honestly, the rewards in heaven, right? The goal is to get to heaven and Jesus to say, good and faithful servant, right? And it feels nice to get all that stuff on before then, but actually, like, I'm actually really terrified of praise. Like, I feel really concerned about compliments, because I feel really, I do feel really worried about, like, it shifting me and shifting my sense of direction and purpose. And I know it might make me, it might make me sound like a bit ridiculous, or, you know, like, I think there's a thing around female socialization where we're not, you know, where women are kind of conditioned after, oh no, don't, you know, like, so there's all sorts of stuff there that we have to examine. But fundamentally, we have to be really, really, I want to safeguard much more against compliments and criticism and my reaction to them, actually. But in terms of like thinking about the subject of this chapter being, how do we avoid being an abusive leader, and how do we what is going on around the perpetration of abuse? I co-facilitated a perpetrator program years ago for men who were abusing their female partners, and this guy arrived, and we always did a check-in every session, and he said, oh, it kicked off before I came out. You know, notice the passive language. It's not that he was abusive, it's that it kicked off. So interesting language there.
Okay.
And I said, oh, what happened? He was like, well, my partner wanted to go out for a meal with her family because she's irrational. And I said she couldn't, and because she's irrational, she's gone out with them. And so it all kicked off. And I was like, oh, what's irrational about wanting to go for a meal with your family? And he was like, well, because I was violent and her family don't like me, and because she's irrational, she wants to go for a meal with them. And I was like, well, what is irrational about wanting to go for a meal with your family? And he just kind of kept talking back to how she was irrational. And it went back and forth, seeing me for a very long time, until he eventually went, oh, she should be able to go for a meal with her family. And I was like, yeah, she really should, shouldn't she? Oh, that's not irrational, is it? No, it's not, is it? And then we were able to have a conversation about the impact of going for a meal, how she was going to be experiencing that meal, and was she going to go next time? Probably not. And this guy, he wasn't like he'd been violent, he'd been, you know, that we might put him in that other monster category. But actually, this guy fundamentally needed to have people around him who helped him to realize his partner wasn't irrational, and he needed to realize he was the one being irrational, not her. And so I think that within, you know, he didn't wake up one day and make us a master plan to control his partner and to end up starting a perpetrator program. He just gradually, day in, day out, made more and more compromises, and fundamentally saw his partner as less than a fully valuable human, and thought that his needs and his wants and his whims mattered more than she did. And, you know, within the church and within Christian culture, it might be that we think that our ministry matters more than they do. It might be that we think the salvation of you know, the people we're evangelizing to matters more than these people. Like, we might be deciding that you know, the kinds of the need for me to be able to continue this affair that I've got, or my need to watch pornography, whatever it is, like, it may be some kind of, you know, very honorable purpose, or it might be some really like horrendous purpose. But the reality is, it doesn't matter when we start to view people as ends, you know, as means and not ends. Sorry, when we start to view people as means and not ends, we start to perpetrate abusive behavior. And we must always, each one of us, safeguard ourselves and be constantly saying, in what ways might I have treated somebody today as a means and not an end, as an end. And the more power that we get as a leader, the more responsibilities we get, the more status we get, the more opportunities we get to speak and to lead and to influence, the easier it is to do that, and to do that without being held accountable and without being challenged. So we've got the more that we have, the more power we have, the easier it is to start to justify ourselves as too important to care about other people as anything other than a means to, whatever it is. And when we have people around us propping up the idea that we matter more than anybody else, then, we are all responsible for the world that we then create in that context.
I think that's a really helpful reflection challenge question to who have I treated as a means rather than an end this week. It's a really, I might even start journaling that. I think it's a really important question. Thank you. I want to end with just a final question, really, which is, look, it's only a little booklet, which is a bit of a sales pitch. Get the booklet. It won't cost you a lot. It will take you 10 minutes to read. No, it won't. It'll take you half an hour to read. It's only a little booklet, 9,500 words, 28 pages. What's your hope for it? What do you hope that such a little humble booklet is going to achieve in this environment? What's your aspirations? What's your hope for it?
I hope that it enables people, because the chapter that I'm writing is much more about how we reflect on our own behavior, and the rest of it is really about reflecting on the ways we might have been hurt, the ways we might have been controlled or mistreated or exploited in different ways. So I suppose my first hope is that people who have been harmed in as a youth leader, as a member of a congregation, within a workplace, within a ministry, whatever context that is, that this book would be like the doorway that they can go through to start getting the resources they need. That will start, there are some within the book, but hopefully it will start them or guide them further on their journey towards healing and wholeness. Jesus wants us to have life in all its fullness, and anything that is not offering us life in all its fullness, we need to be asking questions about it. And so I hope that it takes people further on that journey to life in all its fullness, that Jesus got open for all of us. And I suppose particularly with my contribution, I hope that it will help people to shift their approach from the kind of hurt people approach, or other approaches which seek to explain abusive behavior as anything other than instrumental, or anything other than having a purpose and being to benefit the person who's using that harm. Firstly, so that people can start to, in the context where they're being harmed, start to approach that person causing the harm in a way that will be much more effective than often the ways that we're encouraged to, but also to ensure that each of us are safeguarding ourselves from that kind of the tiny incremental steps that take us down that path ourselves, with the hope that 20 years from now, the leadership model and the ways that people are holding power in Christian culture are unrecognizable from what we have seen in the previous 20 years, really. And obviously that's a quite massive goal, but hopefully this is, one stepping stone or a couple of stepping stones, or a doorway through which people can walk to a different direction than they may have done otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's a great vision, one we can share, one we can pray into. Natalie, if people would like to connect with some of your resources, some of the things that you offer, what's the best way for people to do that?
Yeah, so they can follow me on Twitter as @GodLovesWomen, with underscores between the gods and the loves and the women. I refuse to call it that other name. Okay, if you know as X, I'm on there as that. And also the needs_light on there as well, if you want to follow kind of updates about the Soul Survivor situation. And from there you can kind of access my blog and stuff. And also nataliecollins.info if you want to know more about the wider work I do. If you want to know about the charity that I run and the work that I do, equipping organisations across the UK and Ireland and beyond to work with women who've been subject to abuse, that's the ownmylifecourse.org. And I'll make sure that you've got those links somewhere, so if you want to put them on anything so people don't have to try to type it out and can just copy and paste, that'd be great.
Brilliant. Natalie, this has been incredibly helpful. Thank you so much. Thanks for your contribution to the book. Thank you for this time. Really appreciate it. And all the very best with all that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.